So, welcome to Unify the People Sovereign Stream. Today with us, you have Shane Sweeney. I am from Newfoundland on the East Coast, and we have Michael. You can introduce yourself.
I'm Michael, out in Spruce Grove, Alberta.
Spruce Grove, Alberta. So we got a Newfie, Alberta connection tonight. We're going to be talking about the Bill of Rights this evening. I've had some people bringing up the Bill of Rights a lot lately. I'm hoping that that's because they are starting to see the fraud of the Charter of Rights, which is a good thing if people can start to see that. And we'll elaborate on that as well for those of you who might be curious. Yeah, they're bringing up the Bill of Rights now. When was the Bill of Rights enacted, Michael?
Well, 1960.
1960. So we're going back to 1960. Whose government was that? Is that Diefenbaker?
Back in that era.
Yeah. So off the top, I just want to read this out. I'm going to read out the preamble to this because a lot of this sounds great. And it's like the Charter of Rights. You start reading the equality rights, the mobility rights, all assembly rights, and you're thinking to yourself, good stuff. So this is what is purported to be protected for you in your preamble. The Parliament of Canada affirming that the Canadian nation is founded upon principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God, the dignity and worth of the human person, and the position of the family in a society of free men and free institutions. Affirming also that men and institutions remain free only when freedom is founded upon respect for moral and spiritual views and the rule of law. So they're setting us up here for a nice Bill of Rights here. I'm sure you've got a copy of that in front of you. I know you've got a copy of it in your head anyways. What kind of rights do they have protected in this bill?
Well, would you like to go to the Bill of Rights, or should we carry on just down with the preamble first?
No. Let's start at the very top of this bill. Let's see what they're purporting to protect for us first. So we got section 1 right away.
So section 1, the Bill of Rights, marginal note, recognition and declaration of the rights and freedoms. Now remember, this is a 1960 Canadian Bill of Rights. 1. It is hereby recognized and declared that in Canada that there have existed and shall continue to exist without discrimination for reason of race, national origin, color, religion, or sex, the following human rights and fundamental freedoms, namely, and it starts with A, the right of the individual to life, liberty, security of the person, and enjoyment of property, and the right not to be deprived thereof except by due process of the law. Where have we heard that? B, the right of the individual to equality before the law and the protection of the law. C, freedom of religion. D, like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly and association, and freedom of the press. That's your rights that are listed there.
That is that's a wide scope, and that actually sounds great. Those protections are things I think every sovereign man and woman should have. So why are we picking this bill apart? What's wrong with this?
Well, would we like to skip pretty much right to the end?
Yeah, let's read that.
So where you can find this, like I said, in the Bill of Rights, and you go down to what's called Part 2, and it's 5, number 3. So Part 2 says the provisions of this part shall be known as the Canadian Bill of Rights. So Part 2, and then you go down, it says 5 at the start, So 5.3. The provisions of Part 1, so Part 1 was the rights that we read, shall be construed as extending only to the matters coming within the legislative authority of the Parliament of Canada.
Now,
Yeah,
I've got a problem. I got an issue with that.
And what's your issue, Shane?
That sounds eerily familiar to something that you and I touched on in a few of our previous videos, but it sounds to me like that says, because that section was called jurisdiction of Parliament, was it not?
Yes, it was. That's something I did not mention, but absolutely. And here it doesn't say that, but yeah. So it says jurisdiction of Parliament, and you'll find it. It's number 3.
So let's break down that sentence. The provisions of Part 1, and Part 1 was what we just agreed upon as sounding great, right? All the freedom of the speech, assembly, your rights, yeah. So the provisions of Part 1, all those rights, shall be construed as extending only to matters coming within the legislative authority of the Parliament of Canada. So this Bill of Rights only applies to the federal legislature of Canada?
And that's what it's telling you in that part.
So the whole reason we're discussing the Bill of Rights is because it's rearing its ugly head again in current modern day culture, because the Charter of Rights is dissolving in front of people's eyes because it's not worth the paper it's written on. The paper it's written on is worth more. So why is that? Why is the Charter not worth the paper it's written on?
Well, if you go to the Charter, because everyone quotes, 2, 7, 15, right? Kind of in your Charter, rights and freedom. That's just some examples. They quote more. If you go to section 32 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or the Canada Constitution Acts, which is the application section, Shane, knowing that we talk about the application section itself, who does that refer to?
Well, the one we just read applies to the federal legislature of Canada.
So now that they had 32 and it's a charter and people are understanding what a charter is for, you get to the application section. Now they're covering provincial. So the provincial legislature and the employees. So provincial government and the employees, right?
Yeah, and you just touched on something very important there. We're getting into what a charter is. So we had a Bill of Rights in the 60s, but that only applied to the federal legislature. So a charter, in legal definition, and this is verbatim, the act of legislature that creates a corporation and sets forth its franchise that defines the organization of the corporation. So a charter is an act of legislation that creates a corporation. So our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is an act of legislation that created a corporation. That's the only difference in the Bill of Rights and the Charter of Rights, as far as I can tell, and why they needed a redo, so to speak. Because why do we even need this Charter of Rights if there's a Bill of Rights? They protect the same thing. So you said it. A charter is not for people or for a bill, right?
So, and as you know, when you go down below 32, like we said, the application section, and you read, there's some examples, and it also tells you that it does not apply. I always like to say we the people, so private citizens. That's one of my favorite words is the private citizens, the man and woman, the sovereign. Right?
Absolutely.
And people can verify that themselves by looking it up.
That they can. So when you're talking about the Charter of Rights, and you mentioned it, right? People reference 2 and 7 and 3, and These are all rights that were guaranteed by the Bill of Rights to begin with. Everyone has the fundamental right to freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, peaceful assembly, association. These things already existed, quote unquote, in the Bill of Rights. So the charter wasn't needed for that. But the charter was needed because Canada needed to be registered as a corporation for the Crown to fully have control of it.
Well, see, that's interesting for people, and they may not realize that, whether that is or not. Prior to that, one would think they were, well, quote unquote, Canada the country. Now,
Yeah.
history would tell you that you incorporated a charter in 1982.
That's interesting. Now, I want to bring up something about the charter, and this is something we haven't discussed, I don't believe, on any videos. And I think people need to read more into this because we're aware that the Queen inserted a subject in the charter that needed to be satisfied before the charter could take force. We've discussed that, right? Section 58 and Section 59. Now, she also had to give a royal proclamation in order for the charter to take force as well, because Parliament didn't have any legal footing. And we've touched on why that is, and we don't need to really get into that right now. But if Parliament has no legal footing, that should be a red flag for people. If in the 1980s we still had to go to the Queen for her to issue a royal proclamation for our Parliament to be allowed to do something, that should be a red flag in and of itself. But the proclamation is a very interesting one. Now, she starts off in her very, very typical way. Elizabeth II, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom, Canada, and her other realms and territories, Queen, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, which is a very interesting intro into a incorporation document that you're hiding as a Bill of Rights. But she's giving her proclamation. This is her granting it legal status. And in her proclamation, she actually reads Section 58 and 59, the subjects. So she's repeated her subjects, saying, listen, before your charter can take force, I'm inserting a subject. This subject needs to be satisfied. And when you do, there will be a new proclamation issued to grant your charter legal force. Now, we can get into that in another discussion. The next words she says, after telling you, there is a subject that has to be satisfied before I'm going to grant you your charter, she says, of all which are loving subjects and all others whom these presents may concern, are hereby required to take notice and to govern themselves accordingly. And in testimony whereof we have caused these, our letters, to be made patent, and the great seal of Canada to be hereunto affixed. So, first things first, we are required to take notice and govern ourselves accordingly, that there is a subject inserted on our charter that needs to be satisfied first. That's one thought. But the very next sentence, Nicky, why is that important?
Well, who issues the letter patent? There's a question.
Well, it's coming from the Crown, but why are letters patent being issued? What are letters patent?
Let us hear it.
Well, you may be familiar, letters patent, when we discuss the BNA Act, because the BNA Act, they were letters patent to the Governor General, written by the Crown, and that granted the Governor General the ownership of the company that was running, which was Canada. It was never incorporated from the aspect as what the charter did to it, but it was still a company. There's no we had a CEO, a CFO, like, and that's, I'm not talking the prime minister, I'm talking the governor general, right? So letters patent are documents that a monarch, an open document issued by a monarch conferring a patent or other right to a land or other right. So they issue letters patent to a governor general saying you have the right to own this corporation, this company, and run it as you see fit as long as you please me. That's what a letters patent is, and that's what it was for the BNA Act. Now, our charter is also letters patent.
Well, it's chartered, right? Is it an incorporated document?
It's an incorporation document. To really drive home that point about incorporation of Canada, as Canada incorporated, if I wanted to really drive that point home and prove that, how do I do that?
You can, if you're talking about verifying the information, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and if you want to type in a number, we can look it up. And I do believe on the security, U.S. Security and Commission Stock Exchange. Is that correct?
It sounded right. United States Securities Exchange Commission.
Yes, Exchange Commission.
There you go. Yeah. And that is, of course, where international corporations are regulated and registered. So, absolutely. Is there
a particular, like, are you looking for, like, say, a number?
Yeah. So, is there a number I could have that I could type into my spy box on Google and it would bring me to a website that I could verify this?
There absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And anybody that's looking for the number that has not got it and wants to verify that number. So Canada's registry number is 0000230098. Canada, capital letters, and then you have bracket SIC, capital letters, bracket 8880. And they will be able to look up that information and verify it.
And I did just put that in the chat as well. So if anybody is interested, you put that number into Google. You can go to the Securities Exchange Commission yourself and look the number up that way. But if you're having trouble finding that site or you don't want to do it you can just type that number in. You will get it. So yeah, what you think of as federal budgets that get passed through our House of Assembly, they're posted as financial disclosure for Canada Incorporated on this website.
Well, that's verifiable. All they have to do is go check that out, and anyone can look that information up and verify it. That's, as they say, inconvenient truth or fact, right?
Well, one and the same, I think. If I was going to sum this up, we have a Bill of Rights from the 60s, and though it pretends to enshrine some rights, it only applies to the federal legislature. Now, we fast forwarded 22 years, and we got our Charter of Rights. A charter is incorporation documents. It's an act of legislature that creates a corporation and sets forth the organizational structure of it. So that's our Charter of Rights for the federal and provincial.
And the employees, yes.
And the employees. So they widened their umbrella in terms of who they were protecting on their side, on their team. Right, they covered more of their people, right? But they failed to bring us in each time.
So in saying that, Shane, what we have to do as the men and women, and this is not my saying, other people have said it before, get educated to get liberated, and that's how we move forward.
Well, how can we do that?
by looking up the information, the pertinent information on unifythepeople.ca. There's Zoom links for each province and territory, and meet your locals in each province that are working on what we have a lawful right to do, which we'll probably cover more, a constitution for each sovereign nation.
Absolutely. And anybody who's looking to go down a little rabbit hole as we're signing off, Michael just alluded to something, each province, right? So then you can look up the Statute of Westminster 1931, and you can read sections 2, 7, and 11, and that will likely be a topic of discussion between myself, yourself, and some other sovereigns in the very near future.
Absolutely.
Sounds
Looking
good.
forward to it.
Thanks for coming in. It has been Unify the People Sovereign Stream with Shane and Michael. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.